The summer of 1987 began like any other at the secluded Sleepaway camp nestled deep within the pine-draped hills. Sunlight shimmered across the lake, painting its surface with streaks of gold that danced like fleeting memories. Laughter echoed between cabins, the carefree shouts of children blending with the rustling of leaves and the distant call of loons. The camp smelled of wood smoke, sunscreen, and the damp earth after a morning rain, an intoxicating mix of innocence and freedom. Among the dozens of campers, 12-year-old Emily Harris stood out, not because she was loud or attention-seeking, but because of the quiet curiosity in her eyes. She moved through the world with an awareness that was rare for her age, observing, noting, listening. She was the type of child who noticed the slight tremor in a counselor's voice or the way the clouds gathered before a storm. That summer, she had been excited to try canoeing, to roast marshmallows by the fire, and to write in her journal by the lake under the silver glow of the moon. But that night, the camp was not as it seemed. The evening had started like any other. Dinners in the mess hall, the smell of spaghetti and garlic bread wafting through the warm wooden room. Children were tired but content, whispering excitedly about the talent show scheduled for the next day. The counselors conducted their usual head count, calling names in a rhythmic cadence that seemed to settle the children into the comforting predictability of camp life. Emily had been in cabin 7, near the edge of the camp where the trees thickened, where shadows grew longer than anywhere else. That night, she had brushed her teeth and tucked herself under the patchwork quilt she loved so dearly, humming a soft tune she had learned from her mother. Her cabin mates drifted into sleep around her, their breathing steady, punctuated by the occasional sigh or shift in position. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of the lake and the secrets it held. By morning, Emily was gone. The counselors noticed almost immediately during the routine wake-up call. One by one, they checked the bunks, their voices growing tighter, sharper, edged with panic. Emily? The name echoed down the wooden hallways, bouncing off walls with a hollow emptiness. Her belongings remained untouched, pajamas folded neatly, a favorite book left open on her bedside table, the small silver locket she always wore resting quietly on the quilt. There was no sign of struggle, no hint of her presence beyond the bed she had left. Within minutes, the camp erupted into controlled chaos. Search parties formed, trekking through the dense woods, calling her name into the shadows. Flashlights pierced the underbrush where moonlight once shimmered, but there was no answer, no rustle, no sign of the girl who had greeted summer with such bright eyes. The counselors' voices, once confident and reassuring, began to falter. Fear seeped into the edges of the camp like a slow-moving fog. The parents arrived hours later, frantic and disbelieving. Emily's mother clutched a blanket she had packed, her knuckles white, eyes rimmed with tears, searching desperately for any clue. Her father's voice shook as he whispered her name into the empty cabin, as though calling her back into existence might conjure her presence. The small town nearby, usually peaceful, buzzed with uncertainty. Reporters began to arrive, cameras flashing against the sun-drenched landscape, and the idyllic summer air felt suddenly brittle, heavy with tension and disbelief. The police, calm but urgent, took command of the investigation. They traced the campgrounds meticulously, scouring every inch of land, questioning campers, counselors, and staff. Each interview revealed fragments of memories, small inconsistencies, fleeting glimpses of shadows that may have been nothing, or may have been the first traces of a truth yet to be uncovered. The town held its collective breath, suspended between hope and terror, as the reality of a missing 12-year-old began to sink in. And yet, even as searchlights swept across the trees and authorities combed the lake's edge, there remained a surreal quiet, an eerie contrast to the chaos that had erupted. The same lake that had reflected sunlight and laughter now seemed dark and brooding, as if it had swallowed the innocence of the night along with the girl. The cabins, the paths, the fire pits, they all retained their peaceful guise, betraying nothing of the upheaval that had occurred. This was not just a disappearance, it was a rupture. The summer of laughter and carefree joy was fractured, leaving behind a hollow ache that resonated far beyond the camp's boundaries. Friends whispered in hushed tones about what could have happened. Counselors replayed every moment of the previous night, questioning every decision. The innocence of childhood, the security of routine, the certainty of safety, it had all been stripped away in an instant. For the first time, the world seemed to notice just how fragile it could be. And for Emily Harris, that summer night marked the beginning of a story that would linger for decades, echoing in the memories of those who loved her, haunting the very place where her laughter once rang out so freely. The question hung in the air, thick and unanswerable: where had she gone? Emily Harris was more than just a missing girl. She was a constellation of small, unforgettable details, a personality that left an impression far beyond her 12 years. She had a habit of humming softly when she was nervous, a tune she had learned from her grandmother, a melody that somehow carried both comfort and melancholy. Her brown eyes were unusually perceptive, often noticing things others overlooked, the way a bird perched too long on a branch, the faint tremor in her mother's voice when she thought no one was listening, the way shadows shifted just before a storm. People who knew her described her as thoughtful, inquisitive, a child with an old soul, capable of seeing the world in shades of nuance rather than black and white. Her room in her family's modest home reflected a blend of innocence and burgeoning curiosity. Posters of faraway landscapes adorned the walls, maps of mountains she dreamed of climbing one day, and books stacked in neat, haphazard piles spoke of her imagination and desire to understand more than what lay in her immediate world. Friends remembered her as loyal, the kind of companion who would quietly sit beside someone else in pain, listening, offering small comforts rather than grand gestures. Emily had a gift for empathy, a sensitivity that made her both beloved and, in some ways, vulnerable. At camp, she had been cautiously independent. She loved the freedom of wandering trails alone, sketching leaves or tracing the patterns of light on the lake's surface. Yet, she thrived in quiet companionship, forming bonds with a few close friends rather than the larger, more boisterous groups of children. Camp counselors often noticed her attentiveness, the way she observed everything with an almost preternatural awareness, absorbing details that would escape most adults. It was this combination of independence and subtle social grace that made her presence both comforting and quietly magnetic to those around her. Her family, in retrospect, remembered little nuances that now felt tragically prescient. The way she lingered at the doorway before leaving for camp, the careful way she packed her journal, almost as if she intended to record more than just mundane daily activities. Her mother recalled a quiet seriousness in Emily's expression that summer, a hint of contemplation, almost like she sensed something beyond the campfires and canoe trips, a world bigger, more mysterious, and perhaps, unknowable. Her father remembered watching her tie her shoes in perfect symmetry, then paused to look back at the house, a fleeting expression of both eagerness and hesitation. It was the last image of her before she disappeared, a small girl poised on the threshold of adventure and uncertainty, unaware that the boundary she was about to cross would alter her life, and those of everyone around her, forever. Friends who were with her at camp that summer remembered her laughter, soft but distinct, a musical thread woven through the fabric of daily life. She had a way of noticing when someone was left out, quietly inviting them to join games or sharing a secret smile that made the loneliest camper feel seen. And yet, there was another layer to Emily that few could articulate, a depth of thought, a private inner world glimpsed only in fleeting moments, when she scribbled in her journal, stared into the lake, or asked questions that seemed almost too heavy for her age. She wondered about things like fairness, the unpredictability of life, and why some people were kind while others were cruel, a philosophical curiosity that her peers often found puzzling but intriguing. Camp counselors recalled that Emily often stayed up late, writing in a small notebook she carried everywhere. It wasn't unusual to find her perched on a dock under the moonlight, pen in hand, sketching the shadows of trees or jotting down observations about other campers. Sometimes, she would write long letters to herself, a way to organize thoughts that she did not yet fully understand, thoughts that seemed to carry the weight of her intuitive perception of the world. In these writings, she captured small moments that revealed both a child's wonder and a subtle, lingering unease, details that, decades later, would take on a haunting significance. Her family described her as perceptive in ways that felt almost uncanny. She would ask questions that cut straight to the heart of matters others skirted around, or offer insight into people's moods without being prompted. When asked about what she wanted in life, she would speak simply of wanting to explore, to understand, to witness the world. She was deeply curious, not restless, but present, absorbing and processing life in ways that exceeded her years. This combination of quiet observation and emotional depth made her disappearance feel all the more wrenching. She was not merely gone. The absence of her consciousness, her unique lens on the world, left a palpable void. Even her smallest habits are recalled with a bittersweet clarity. She loved the smell of fresh pages in a book, would collect smooth stones from the lake to study their patterns, and had a habit of tracing clouds with her eyes, inventing stories from their shapes. Her favorite moments at camp were the quiet ones, canoeing before dawn, listening to the wind whisper through the pines, or sitting by the campfire as dusk fell and the sky turned a soft purple. In those moments, she seemed completely herself, completely alive, an ordinary child with extraordinary presence. As the years passed, those who knew Emily would often describe her absence not only in terms of grief but in the subtle, persistent awareness of loss. The laughter she had shared, the observations she had made, the quiet wisdom she carried, these lingered in the memories of her friends and family, haunting in their clarity. Her life, though tragically interrupted, became a prism through which everyone who knew her viewed the fragility of childhood, the unpredictability of safety, and the profound, enduring impact of a single individual's presence in the lives of others. It is impossible to overstate the emotional weight of truly knowing Emily Harris. Her disappearance did not merely remove her from the physical world. It erased a lens through which many had experienced beauty, curiosity, and empathy. Those who loved her remember her still, not as a missing child, but as a vivid, living memory, a girl whose eyes saw too much, whose heart felt too deeply, whose absence left a void that would reverberate for decades to come. In understanding Emily, the audience begins to comprehend the depth of the tragedy, the magnitude of what was lost, and the emotional resonance that would sustain the mystery of her disappearance for the next 36 years. The camp itself was more than a collection of cabins and trails. It was a world unto itself, a microcosm of childhood freedom and the rituals that shaped each summer. The wooden walkways creaked underfoot, the cabins lined neatly along the edge of the forest, their small porches offering glimpses of the lake beyond. Pine trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows during the afternoon and whispering secrets in the night breeze. From a distance, the camp seemed idyllic, a sanctuary where children could leave behind the responsibilities of home and embrace a rhythm dictated by sun, water, and the cadence of daily activities. Yet, within this picturesque setting lay a subtle tension, an undercurrent that often went unnoticed by adults but was felt keenly by children like Emily. The camp rules, seemingly benign, created invisible boundaries: which areas were safe, which trails off-limits, which cabins off-limits after dark. Counselors enforced these rules with a mix of stern authority and gentle encouragement, trying to balance freedom with safety, trust with oversight. To an outsider, the rules seemed adequate, routine, even comforting. But in retrospect, certain blind spots became chillingly apparent: the secluded paths that meandered toward the forest, the cabins shadowed by trees, the corners of the lake that stretched into darkness. The lake itself was both beautiful and enigmatic, a calm mirror of the sky by day, a dark expanse at night that seemed to swallow sound. Children were instructed never to go alone, to wear life jackets, to respect the water, but the freedom of unsupervised exploration was tempting, irresistible even, and some campers quietly tested the boundaries. Emily, thoughtful and careful, generally adhered to the rules, but her curiosity was a quiet, persistent force. She would linger at the water's edge, trace patterns in the sand, watch the moonlight shimmer across rippling water, absorbing the world in ways that would later gain an eerie resonance. The paths through the woods were another layer of the camp's character. Narrow trails twisted through dense pine, interrupted by sudden clearings that opened onto meadows or small ponds. Sunlight would filter through the canopy in shafts, illuminating the forest floor in dappled patterns, creating both beauty and the illusion of safety. At night, those same paths became enigmatic and mysterious, shadows stretching and merging, creating shapes that could be easily misinterpreted. Counselors patrolled diligently, but the very nature of the woods meant that children could slip from sight within seconds, their small forms swallowed by the labyrinthine undergrowth. Cabins like Emily's, positioned near the forest's edge, offered both charm and vulnerability. They were painted in cheerful colors, their interiors filled with the scents of pine, blankets, and the faint lingering smell of last night's campfire. Yet proximity to the woods made them isolated. The other cabins clustered closer to the main lodge, where adults could monitor more effectively, but Emily's cabin sat slightly apart, separated by a thin stretch of grass and the whispering trees. This spatial arrangement, innocent in design, would later become significant, a reminder of how environment shapes vulnerability. Daily life at the camp followed a familiar rhythm: wake-up calls, communal breakfasts, canoe lessons, arts and crafts, swim time at the lake, evening campfires, and bedtime routines. These routines created a comforting structure, a safety net of predictability. But they also masked the subtle cracks in the environment, the moments when the rules could be bent, when shadows could conceal, when a child's curiosity might lead them beyond the safety of adult supervision. Within this rhythm, Emily moved with careful awareness, a blend of confidence and caution, absorbing each sensory detail with an almost preternatural attentiveness. Even the sounds of the camp contributed to its duality of innocence and subtle menace. During the day, birdsong mingled with the laughter of children and the creak of oars in the lake, creating a symphony of life and freedom. At night, however, the camp transformed. The wind through the trees became a whisper, the lakes lapping against the shore a rhythmic pulse in the darkness, and the rustling undergrowth hinted at movements unseen. Shadows elongated, and the familiar became strange. The children, nestled in their beds, heard these noises differently, Some dismissed them, others felt unease, and for Emily, these nocturnal sounds would later gain profound significance when her absence was discovered. Counselors, many of them teenagers themselves, often underestimated the forest's quiet complexity. They patrolled with good intentions, but the sheer expanse of trees, hidden paths, and secluded cabins made complete oversight impossible. The very elements that made the camp magical, the freedom to explore, the intimacy with nature, the unstructured time, also made it a place of latent risk. The contrast between the camp's outward cheerfulness and the shadows lurking at its edges created a tension that would later magnify the mystery of Emily's disappearance. Even the smallest details of the camp environment, the positioning of benches, the overgrown corners of the trail, the tilt of a dock over the water, became psychologically charged after Emily vanished. Every location that had once seemed innocuous was re-evaluated, reinterpreted, as if the camp itself held secrets that had been invisible to all who walked its paths. The same cabins where children had laughed now seemed ominous, the same woods whispering with hidden stories, the same lake reflecting not innocence but absence. Understanding the camp in 1987 is crucial to understanding the disappearance itself. The environment was at once nurturing and confining, open yet filled with blind spots, a place where a child could feel both liberated and perilously exposed. This duality, the beauty and the danger, the freedom and the vulnerability, sets the stage for the events that would unfold, emphasizing how even the most idyllic settings can harbor uncertainty and fear. For Emily, the camp was home, playground, and sanctuary, but also the backdrop against which the unfathomable would occur, a silent witness to a story that would reverberate for decades. By exploring the camp in this way, the audience begins to grasp not just the physical space, but the psychological landscape that framed Emily's final hours there. The paths, the cabins, the lake, and the forests all become characters in their own right, shaping behavior, influencing perception, and holding secrets that would remain hidden until the emergence of her journal decades later. The setting is no longer just a backdrop, it is a participant, an unseen force, a stage upon which a mystery as emotionally compelling as it is enigmatic would unfold. By the time the sun rose over the pine-draped hills, the reality of Emily Harris's disappearance had begun to settle like a shadow over the camp. The first light of morning revealed empty cabins, untroubled by the chaos that had erupted just hours before. For those who had spent the night hoping for a simple explanation, she had wandered off and would return, hope began to crack. Counselors, once confident and organized, moved with a tense urgency, their eyes darting toward every corner, their voices tight as they called her name into the empty spaces. Search parties formed quickly, adults and older campers moving methodically along the trails and across the grounds. The forest, once comforting in its beauty, now felt like a labyrinth of uncertainty. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow cast by the morning sun, seemed to hint at hidden movement. Emily's friends walked the paths they had explored together, calling her name with trembling voices, searching for the familiar figure that should have been there. The lake, so often a mirror of tranquility, now seemed indifferent, its gentle ripples mocking the frantic energy along its shores. The police arrived mid-morning, their presence both reassuring and disquieting. They methodically took statements, separating campers and counselors to ensure no detail was missed. Every recounting of Emily's actions, every observation about the previous night, was scrutinized for meaning. Small details began to take on disproportionate weight, the exact placement of her shoes, the angle of the blanket folded on her bed, a missing page in her journal. Each piece of information carried potential significance, and yet, the puzzle remained frustratingly incomplete. Counselors remembered her as meticulous and thoughtful, she had followed routines and respected boundaries. Nothing about her behavior suggested a desire to run away, to vanish willingly. Parents, meanwhile, were gripped by a different kind of fear, a terror rooted not in the unknown paths of the forest, but in the possibility of something darker. They combed through memories, reconstructing the hours leading up to her disappearance with painful precision. Every glance, every hesitation, every soft word she had spoken in those days was now viewed through the lens of tragedy, small moments suddenly magnified into a haunting significance. Meanwhile, reporters arrived, their cameras flashing in the bright summer sun. They captured the frantic energy of the camp, the grim determination of authorities, the quiet despair of parents who refused to leave a single corner unsearched. The story quickly spilled beyond the camp's boundaries, infiltrating the surrounding town, turning neighbors into witnesses, and creating a web of speculation and rumor. The very normalcy of summer was shattered, the familiar rhythm of life was replaced by a tense urgency, a collective holding of breath as everyone waited for news that never came. Search teams extended beyond the immediate campgrounds, moving into nearby woods, trails, and hidden corners of the hills. Volunteers combed through dense undergrowth, calling her name until their voices were raw. Boats skimmed the lake's surface, scanning for any sign of movement, any hint that Emily might still be found. Helicopters hovered above, their blades slicing the air, their shadows dancing on the forest floor, but no trace emerged. Every direction that seemed promising ended in frustration. The longer the search continued without results, the more the despair deepened, settling into a heavy, almost tangible presence. Investigators also turned to the campers themselves, questioning the small group of children who had been with Emily the previous night. Their memories were fragmented, filtered through the lens of fear and confusion. Some recalled glimpses of movement at the edge of the woods, a fleeting shadow. Others remembered nothing, their young minds unable to reconcile routine with the sudden, inexplicable absence. Counselors struggled to interpret these statements, unsure how much was imagined, how much distorted by the panic of the moment, and how much might contain a vital clue. Every word, every pause, became part of an intricate and perplexing mosaic that investigators struggled to decode. As the day progressed, the emotional weight of the search began to manifest in different ways. Parents hovered near the camp, alternating between frantic pacing and silent prayers, clutching mementos, calling her name over and over in the hope that sound itself might summon her. Friends of Emily, too young to fully understand the implications, felt a gnawing emptiness, a sense that something permanent had shifted in the world they had once taken for granted. Counselors, some barely older than Emily herself, wrestled with guilt and fear, questioning whether a single oversight had created the conditions for her disappearance. By evening, the authorities were forced to confront a terrifying reality. Emily Harris had vanished without a trace. There was no evidence of abduction, no indication of a struggle, no sign that she had simply wandered away. The landscape that had seemed familiar and protective during the day had become alien and unknowable. The forest whispered secrets that could not be deciphered, the lake reflected nothing but emptiness, and the cabin stood silent, holding the memory of her presence but revealing nothing of her absence. In those early hours of investigation, contrast framed the emotional landscape. The idyllic, sunlit camp of the previous day had been replaced by a shadowed world where certainty had been stripped away. Laughter and light were replaced by tension and silence. Routine had become a memory, replaced by the extraordinary effort to locate a child who had slipped through the protective layers of the world. This sudden, jarring shift emphasized both the fragility of childhood innocence and the overwhelming weight of adult responsibility in the face of the unknown. The night fell, and still Emily was missing. Searchlights cut through the darkness, piercing the forest with temporary clarity, yet retreating as quickly as they advanced. Parents, friends, and authorities huddled together, drawing comfort from one another while simultaneously confronting the stark reality. The girl who had brought so much warmth and curiosity to their lives was now absent, and no amount of searching could fully restore her presence. The questions were unending. Where had she gone? How could a place so full of life and routine hold such a sudden void? And, most hauntingly, what did the night conceal that none could yet see? It was in these early hours, the frantic searches, the interviews, the mounting tension, that the first threads of a mystery began to weave themselves. Clues, subtle and contradictory, emerged like shards of glass, glinting in the sunlight yet refusing to reveal the whole picture. Every discovery, every observation, intensified the emotional gravity of the case, pulling family, friends, and investigators alike into a vortex of uncertainty, fear, and unresolved tension. The investigation had begun, but the truth remained elusive, as if hidden by the very fabric of the camp itself. In the days following Emily's disappearance, the camp and surrounding town were enveloped by a fog of speculation, whispers, and unease. What had been a simple, idyllic summer transformed into a web of rumor, each thread tinged with fear and the desperate need for answers. Children spoke quietly among themselves, exchanging fragmented memories, their imaginations filling the gaps left by the unknown. Did she go home? One would ask. Or did she get lost in the woods? Another voice, trembling with the weight of half-understood dread, suggested darker possibilities. The innocence of camp conversation had fractured, replaced by a collective, simmering anxiety. Adults were no less affected, though their fear was expressed in different ways. Counselors replayed the previous night in their minds repeatedly, questioning every decision, every glance, every moment of distraction. Parents of other campers hovered near the cabins, guarding their own children with a new intensity, afraid that the same fate might befall them. The lines between caution and paranoia blurred, creating an atmosphere where ordinary actions were scrutinized, and ordinary words carried hidden meaning. Everyone looked at one another differently, silently questioning who could be trusted, who might know more than they admitted, who might have glimpsed something crucial. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by the very human need to make sense of the senseless. Some whispered about strangers in the woods, shadowy figures glimpsed at the edge of trails. Others suggested internal explanations, an accidental fall, a child wandering too far, the forest claiming its own. Each theory, plausible or fantastical, became a small lens through which fear and grief were filtered, shaping perceptions and amplifying tension. In small towns, a story like this rarely remains contained. It seeps into every conversation, coloring interactions, and leaving no one untouched. Children who had been closest to Emily were both witnesses and participants in the creation of these rumors. Their memories were fragile, colored by emotion, imagination, and suggestion. Some recalled fleeting glimpses of her walking near the lake at twilight. Others insisted they had seen her near the edge of the woods, a shadow among shadows. Counselors had to navigate the delicate task of questioning without suggestion, aware that young minds could fabricate details in an attempt to cope with the fear and confusion. Each account added layers of complexity, making the mystery more intricate and emotionally charged. The media, too, played a role in shaping the narrative. Local reporters arrived with cameras and microphones, eager for stories that could capture the tension gripping the community. Headlines oscillated between hope and fear. Campers in panic as girl vanishes, search expands into forest and lake, mysterious disappearance baffles authorities. For the family, this attention was both a blessing and a curse. Publicity increased the chances of finding Emily, but also amplified the anxiety and uncertainty that had already taken root. Every day brought a flood of new speculation, each claim more sensational than the last, leaving the truth entangled with rumor. Even within the camp, tensions rose as children and counselors navigated their fear in real time. Trust, once assumed, became fragile. Children whispered about who might have been near the cabins that night, about who might have seen what no one else noticed. Counselors were scrutinized, not out of malice, but from a need to understand the forces that could allow a child to vanish without warning. Every interaction carried the weight of possibility and suspicion, and the serene image of summer camp life seemed impossibly distant. The social dynamics of the town shifted as well. Families who had not previously interacted now came together in shared worry. Neighborhoods organized informal search parties, trawling the woods, the hills, and nearby roads, each person hoping to catch a glimpse of something overlooked. Conversations at the grocery store, at the gas station, at church, all carried an undercurrent of the same question: what had happened to Emily Harris? The emotional impact rippled outward, creating a collective unease that seemed to permeate every aspect of daily life. Contrasts were sharp and painful. Summer, a season usually associated with warmth and freedom, was now tinged with dread. Campfires that had once sparked laughter now sparked hushed conversations about possibility and danger. The forest, once a playground for curiosity and adventure, was now a realm of suspicion, every rustle of leaves a potential clue or threat. Even ordinary sounds, footsteps along the trail, the splash of water in the lake, were reframed, imbued with tension and uncertainty. Psychologically, this period was charged with ambiguity. No one knew what had happened, and the mind, confronted with uncertainty, seeks patterns. The combination of fear, hope, grief, and imagination created a fertile ground for rumors to grow. Each story, each whispered suggestion, became a small attempt to fill the void left by Emily's absence, a way to make sense of something inherently senseless. The emotional weight of these whispers, the guilt, the fear, the longing for resolution, was nearly as palpable as the mystery itself. By the end of the week, the camp and the town had been transformed. The laughter, games, and carefree chatter of children were tempered by the unspoken fear of the unknown. Parents hovered, counselors watched anxiously, and children tiptoed through routines they once performed with ease. The absence of Emily Harris had created a landscape where reality and imagination intertwined, where hope and dread coexisted, and where every small detail, every shadow, could carry meaning. This was a world forever altered, suspended between the ordinary and the ominous, setting the stage for the decades-long mystery that would continue to haunt those who had known her. As the initial search faded and the frantic days turned into weeks, the world of Emily Harris began to settle into a disorienting, hollow stillness. The urgency that had propelled parents, counselors, and authorities into relentless action gradually dissipated, replaced by the quiet torment of unanswered questions. Each day without news became heavier than the last, a subtle but constant weight pressing against the hearts of those who loved her. What had begun as immediate panic evolved into a slow, persistent ache, a grief that did not find closure but lingered, shapeless and enduring. The case quickly grew cold. Leads that had once promised clarity dissolved under scrutiny, each clue examined, doubted, and ultimately discarded. Witnesses remembered fragments that never quite aligned, sightings proved to be false. The forest and lake, once combed with urgency, revealed nothing new. Authorities, constrained by resources and the passage of time, were forced to scale back searches, relegating Emily's disappearance to a folder labeled unsolved, a ghost case among many. The contrast between the early chaos and the stillness of these months emphasized a stark, emotional void. The world had moved on, but her absence remained, stubbornly and painfully, inescapable. Her family, meanwhile, navigated a different dimension of suffering. Without answers, life became a delicate balancing act between hope and despair. Her mother would repeatedly visit the camp, tracing the paths Emily had once walked, lingering by the lake as if proximity might somehow summon her presence. Her father, once outwardly stoic, found himself consumed by the minutiae of what could have been, replaying conversations, reconstructing timelines, and imagining scenarios that alternated between comfort and horror. The passage of time did nothing to dull the pain, it merely reframed it, embedding it into the structure of daily life in ways both visible and subtle. Community memory of Emily shifted as well. The town, initially galvanized by the search and media attention, eventually adapted to the new normal. The missing girl who had once dominated conversations became a quiet presence in the background, referenced in whispers, commemorated in small gestures, and never forgotten entirely. Friends grew up carrying fragments of the summer they had shared with her, moments of laughter intertwined with the shadow of absence. Sleepaway Camp continued to operate, summers passed, but every returning camper, counselor, and parent felt the invisible weight of the unsolved mystery, the knowledge that somewhere, the story remained incomplete. For the investigators who had worked tirelessly in those first critical weeks, the transition into a cold case was both professional and personal. Files were meticulously organized, evidence catalogued, photographs stored, but nothing could fill the gaping hole left by the missing girl. Years later, they would recall the sense of incompletion, the nagging feeling that somewhere in the woods, along the trails, or in the overlooked corners of the camp, a small but vital detail had been missed. The emotional burden of unresolved responsibility lingered long after the case was shelved, a quiet reminder of the fragility of closure and the persistence of human uncertainty. Emily's friends, too, grew older carrying the shadow of her absence. Adolescence and adulthood unfolded against the backdrop of a missing childhood companion. Birthdays came and went, milestones were achieved, yet the memory of Emily remained a persistent ache, a reminder of innocence interrupted. For some, the absence sparked subtle obsession, replaying the last summer together in their minds, imagining conversations that never happened, reconstructing her personality in painstaking detail. For others, it bred a quiet anxiety, a recognition that life could change irreversibly in a single, inexplicable instant. The media, once frantic in its coverage, gradually reduced the intensity of attention. Newspapers archived their initial stories, television segments faded from reruns, and the public shifted focus to the next sensational case. But for those who loved Emily, and for the small community around the camp, her absence continued to resonate daily. The emotional contrast between the public's fading interest and the family's persistent grief highlighted a profound human truth. While society moves forward, personal loss remains timeless, embedded in memory and lived experience. Over the years, attempts to revive the investigation met with frustration. New technology promised hope, advances in forensic science, renewed searches using modern equipment, but each effort underscored the limits imposed by time. Memories had faded, evidence had decayed, and the world itself had shifted, leaving Emily's disappearance suspended in an uneasy limbo. The emotional toll on her family and friends deepened, as hope and despair became inseparable companions, intertwined in a delicate balance that resisted resolution. During these decades, Emily became more than a missing child. She became a symbol of unresolved longing, a quiet reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictability of fate. Her story was passed down through whispered recollections, shared among generations of campers, counselors, and townspeople, each retelling imbuing her absence with both grief and reverence. She existed simultaneously in memory and in imagination, a spectral presence that haunted familiar places and conversations, shaping the emotional landscape of the community in subtle but enduring ways. Yet, even in the stillness of the cold years, there remained a fragile spark of possibility. Small gestures, a found photograph, a revisited clue, an unexplored corner of the camp, kept hope alive, even if only faintly. The passage of time sharpened the contrast between what was lost and what might still be uncovered, emphasizing both the enduring weight of absence and the persistent human desire for resolution. For Emily's family, and for those who loved her, life became a continuous act of remembrance and longing, a testament to the depth of emotional bonds and the haunting persistence of unanswered questions. Through these decades, the world moved forward, yet Emily Harris remained suspended in time. Her disappearance, unresolved and enigmatic, became a lens through which the fragility of childhood, the power of memory, and the complexity of grief were examined. The cold years were not empty, they were filled with the quiet ache of absence, the weight of lingering questions, and the emotional tension of hope deferred. It was within this void, silent but ever-present, that the threads of her story waited patiently, poised for the moment when they might be awakened once more. Decades passed, and the mystery of Emily Harris remained frozen in time, a story suspended between memory and speculation. Then, 36 years after that fateful summer, a discovery shifted the trajectory of everything the family thought they knew. A small, worn journal surfaced, its leather cover cracked, pages yellowed with age, and the familiar handwriting unmistakable. It was Emily's. How it had survived, and how it had remained hidden for so long, was unclear. The journal seemed almost miraculous, a tangible connection across the chasm of time, a bridge linking the present to the vanished past. When the journal was first handed to her mother, the weight of it seemed heavier than its physical form. It was more than paper and ink, it was the echo of a child's thoughts, fears, and observations. Each page carried Emily's voice with startling clarity, her words weaving together fragments of her world that had long been imagined, speculated upon, and mourned. For 36 years, her inner life had remained invisible, her presence absent yet profoundly felt. Now, the journal offered a window, however small, into the mind of the girl who had disappeared so suddenly and inexplicably. The entries were at once ordinary and extraordinary. Emily wrote about the daily rhythms of camp life, the canoe lessons, arts and crafts, quiet afternoons by the lake, but she also recorded moments of keen perception that seemed beyond her years. She noted the subtle moods of counselors, the dynamics between campers, and the small, almost imperceptible changes in her surroundings. She wrote about shadows that lingered too long in the woods, a feeling of unease near the cabins on the forest edge, and the uncanny stillness that sometimes fell over the lake at dusk. What had once seemed trivial or innocuous now took on an unsettling weight, each observation a potential clue wrapped in the innocent curiosity of a child. As family and investigators pored over the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Emily's entries revealed a mind constantly aware, analyzing, and recording the world around her. She spoke of her friends with tenderness, noting their quirks and gestures, their small triumphs and private disappointments. She recorded her own thoughts, reflections on fear, trust, and the sense that something was not quite right. Reading the journal, it became clear that Emily had sensed, intuitively, silently, that her world was not as secure as it appeared. The tone was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet in hindsight profoundly haunting. Some entries hinted at her curiosity about boundaries, both physical and emotional. She described walking near the edge of the forest, observing the patterns of leaves, and noticing the way shadows shifted with the movement of the sun. She remarked on the feeling of being watched, though she never indicated fear toward any specific person. Her words carried a quiet alertness, a heightened awareness that suggested she had an understanding of vulnerability that few children possess. The journal did not contain dramatic confessions or overt warnings. It was Emily's lens on her world, precise, tender, and unflinching. Perhaps the most striking passages were those in which Emily reflected on the forest and the lake, the two constants of her summer environment. She wrote of the lake's surface at dawn, still and reflective, capturing the colors of the sky and the rustle of distant trees. She described the forest as both sheltering and secretive, a place of play and discovery, yet also of quiet observation, where the smallest detail could hold meaning. Reading these passages, one could almost feel Emily's presence beside the water, inhaling the scent of pine, tracing the sunlight on the leaves, listening intently to the world she had inhabited. Emotionally, the journal was transformative. For her family, it offered both comfort and renewed grief. It was a reminder of who Emily had been, the curious, perceptive, emotionally attuned child they had loved, but it was also a stark illustration of how abruptly her life had been interrupted. Every word was a testament to her presence, a voice reaching across decades, insisting that she had existed fully, even in absence. For investigators, the journal provided context, a psychological map of Emily's final known state of mind, revealing a mixture of innocence, attentiveness, and subtle intuition that had gone unrecognized in the original investigation. The journal also reframed the passage of time. It collapsed 36 years into the immediacy of her words. For a moment, Emily was no longer a memory, no longer a figure suspended in absence. She was present, intimately, through her observations, her reflections, and the cadence of her writing. Each entry felt like a conversation, a whisper from the past, reminding everyone who read it of the child who had vanished and the world that had changed around her. Yet the journal was not merely a collection of observations, it was a map of emotional resonance. Within its pages, there were glimpses of fear, curiosity, hope, and wonder. The mundane details of camp life were interwoven with deeper reflections, creating a tapestry of insight that was profoundly moving. The journal revealed that Emily had perceived layers of reality invisible to others, that she had experienced her world with a clarity and attentiveness that made her disappearance even more haunting. The discovery of the journal transformed the narrative of Emily's disappearance. It shifted the story from a frozen mystery to a living testament of her mind and spirit. It created an emotional bridge between past and present, grief and understanding, absence and presence. Suddenly, the decades of unanswered questions were infused with new significance, each page a reminder that while Emily Harris had vanished from the physical world, her consciousness, her voice, and her perceptions had endured, hidden but intact, waiting for the moment they could finally be heard. The decision to revisit the camp after more than 3 decades was not made lightly. For Emily's family, the journey back to those wooded hills was an act of courage, an emotional reckoning with the place that had been both sanctuary and site of unimaginable loss. The path leading to the camp had changed over the years. Trails had widened, trees had grown taller and denser, cabins had been repainted, and the lake's edges subtly reshaped by the passing seasons. Yet beneath the surface, the essence of the camp, the shadows, the rustling pines, the stillness of the lake at dawn, remained the same, a living memory frozen in time. Arriving at the camp was surreal. The sunlight filtering through the canopy seemed to illuminate not only the forest floor but also decades of grief and unanswered questions. Emily's mother paused at the familiar dock, fingers brushing the worn wood, tracing the grooves that had likely felt the weight of Emily's small hands 36 years prior. Her father, usually composed, found himself overwhelmed by the juxtaposition of past and present. The vivid memory of laughter and life contrasted with the emptiness left behind. Every corner of the camp seemed alive with echoes, footsteps on wooden walkways, the whisper of leaves in the wind, distant calls of birds that had likely sung the same songs for generations. Walking through the cabins, the family was struck by the continuity of space and the eerie permanence of absence. Each cabin retained a semblance of its old character, yet it was impossible not to overlay memory onto reality. Emily's favorite cabin, the one she had shared with her closest friends, felt simultaneously familiar and hollow. They remembered the faint smell of pine and laundry, the arrangement of beds, and the sun streaming through the windows in patterns they had long memorized. Standing there decades later, every small detail seemed magnified, every shadow charged with significance. The camp was at once a museum of memories and a stage for unresolved mystery. The lake, a central figure in Emily's summer world, held a profound emotional gravity. Its surface, calm and reflective in the morning light, seemed to carry a memory of her presence, as though the water itself remembered the child who had spent so many hours observing its movements. Her mother lingered on the shore, tracing the outline of the dock with her gaze, imagining Emily sitting there with her journal, pen in hand, recording the subtle shifts in light and wind. The lake's edge, once a playful boundary, now symbolized the vast unknown, a space where the certainty of childhood met the uncertainty of fate. Exploring the trails that twisted through the forest brought a deeper, almost visceral connection to Emily's experiences. The dense undergrowth, the shafts of sunlight piercing the canopy, the quiet whisper of leaves overhead, each element evoked the sensory world she had inhabited. It was impossible not to feel the tension she must have sensed, the subtle ways shadows shifted, the hidden corners that could conceal movement, the isolated clearings that seemed inviting yet carried an undercurrent of unease. These paths, walked so many times before, now served as both memory and meditation, a means of retracing steps that had long been shrouded in mystery. The counselor's old routes, the gathering spaces, and the small nooks where children had confided secrets were all revisited, each location offering a mixture of comfort and disquiet. Emily's family tried to place themselves in her shoes, the perspective of a 12-year-old navigating both friendship and curiosity, awe and caution, freedom and subtle fear. Every observation recorded in her journal could now be overlaid onto the camp's geography, revealing connections previously invisible. The landscape itself seemed to respond, echoing the emotional tension of absence, memory, and lingering presence. The act of revisiting was not only physical but profoundly psychological. Emily's family confronted not just the space but the emotional contours of that summer, walking through grief, hope, and unresolved longing. Each path and cabin became a mirror, reflecting both what was lost and what remained, the vibrancy of her life, the subtleties of her personality, and the mysteries of her disappearance. There was a surreal contrast between the external calm of the camp and the internal storm of memories and what ifs, between the passage of time and the frozen moment of tragedy that had left its mark. Even the small, seemingly insignificant details resonated with new weight. A worn wooden bench where she